Hello Julian, and thank you for joining us for this interview at Riga Security Conference. So first of all, I'd like to ask you about your expectations about the upcoming Normandy Four meeting and about the so-called Steinmeier formula.
Well, first of all, of course, it is very good that there is a Normandy Four meeting on the highest level, because we have seen meetings on the foreign ministerial level, on the directorate level, but not on the leaders of state level for, I think, many years now. So it is very good that these people are talking again to each other. However, I think that the preconditions set for this meeting are a little bit faulty. Because as you mentioned, the Steinmeier formula was to be implemented was a precondition, which was, I think, brought up by Russia. It was not clearly stated, but Germany said that's a precondition, not by us, but by others, so probably it was Russia. And as you know, the Steinmeier formula leads to lots of discussions in Ukraine, even protests on the street. And I think the reason is that it is not clear what it does mean, because what it says itself is that there should be disengagement of forces, that there should be regional elections, and there should be a special status. So these are all points which are included in the Minsk agreements, but they are in the context of a wider Russian-Ukrainian peace process, meaning the withdrawal of foreign forces, mainly Russian forces, meaning the withdrawal of all heavy weapons from Ukrainian territory, not only from a certain corridor along the front, and of course regaining sovereignty of Ukraine over its borders. All these things are not talked about in the Steinmeier formula, which is why there's a big uncertainty now, and the Zelensky government has to say, yes, Steinmeier formula, but elections according to Ukrainian law, control over our border. And let's be serious, if you have elections to Ukrainian law and control over the Russian-Ukrainian border from the Ukrainian side, this is the fulfillment of Minsk. So the question is whether or not it's meaningful at all to say Steinmeier formula has to be implemented first and then we go to meet. Because the Steinmeier formula can only be implemented, I think, according to most Ukrainians, even the president knows this, if the so-called republics of Lugansk and Donetsk don't exist anymore. And this is not given, so that's why I think that this precondition is sort of tricky and also sort of cheating the partners in the process. However, if everyone agrees that the formula is sort of implemented or sort of agreed upon, and that's why they meet again at the highest level, that's a good thing.
So, do you basically think that this Steinmeier formula is a trap in which Ukraine is forced to act first? I
think that our foreign minister then, in 2016, Mr. Steinmeier, was, because of party politics, because of domestic affairs, and because of his relationships, his good relationship with Russia, he's honorary doctor at the University of Yekaterinburg, for example, was biased. I think so, it was biased, and I think it was not fully thought through, and I think it only picks out the numbers of the Minsk agreements which are to be fulfilled by Ukraine. And that's why I think it is impossible to fulfill by Ukraine, because then the other side doesn't have to do anything. But I also think that the Ukrainian government sees this, and the Ukrainian government clearly said that we need control over our borders, we need Ukrainian law to be implemented before these elections can take place. And so you could be right that it is a trap, but I don't think and I don't hope for Ukraine that it is stepping into this trap.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect at this Normandy Four summit there will be pressure on behalf of Germany and France on Ukraine in order to somehow bring peace and solve finally this Ukrainian issue that somebody in Europe might be already fed up with? Do you expect there would be this significant pressure, maybe at any cost, to solve it at any cost?
Well, I think there's always pressure when these four nations meet, no matter their leaders of state, because it's about a war which is ongoing, which just yesterday killed another Ukrainian soldiers, and more than, I think more than 200 this year already. So it's a war going on, and there should be pressure on everyone. However, one-sided pressure on the Ukrainian side may be increasing, not mainly because of Germany. Germany right now has a government and a position, I think, which is quite neutral between these two countries, between Ukraine and Russia. And you can like this or not, because some Ukrainians say it shouldn't be neutral, it should be on our side, because we are part of Europe and we are attacked. But I think what is the bigger problem right now is France. And France wants a restart with Russia, France wants to get rid of the sanctions. And of course France is pressuring Germany to also have their stance at the conference and then act together to get some sort of breakthrough. However, I think as long as Russia does not fulfill its obligations under Minsk, as I said before, withdrawal of all forces, giving back the border to Ukraine, and this means effectively the end of the two so-called People's Republics, then there should be no relaxation in sanctions. That's my personal opinion.
So you mentioned this French efforts to somehow bring Russia back into the orbit, to reset relations. How was this initiative by President Macron received in Germany, and might Germany follow suit?
Well, Germany for a couple of years now is the main force behind prolonging sanctions against Russia in Western Europe. Of course, you have countries in Eastern Europe which would say, of course, like here in Latvia, these sanctions may not be eased even until Crimea is given back, which is, as we all know, very uncertain that this will happen before these sanctions are released, or even after these sanctions are released. I think the German position has not changed much. We have, tough to say, but we have other problems than Ukraine. We have internal problems, we have refugee problems, we have problems with right-wing extremists, and all these problems cannot be solved and cannot be not solved or solved if something happens in Eastern Ukraine or if Russia withdraws. So I think there's no big difference there. Also, as you might know, Germany is in the process of finishing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline with Russia. And this is also, as it seems, totally independent from whatever happens in Ukraine. So my point is that Germany has no intention right now to change its politics. I don't see another government, I don't see other ministers which are more pro-Russian, I don't see them right now. So I think our position is constant. France's position is changing, apparently. There was talk that Macron wants Mr. Putin back in the G7. There was talk about this. It's not clear if Mr. Trump invented this or if this really happened. But there are other signs. Just lately, the French foreign minister and defense minister being in Moscow discussing and laughing and having fun with these people there, which are not only responsible for the war in Ukraine with 13,000 deaths, but which are also responsible for the war in Syria, where Russia killed more than 7,000 people since the start of 2015 and displaced more than 3 million people, of which many are in Europe and in Germany right now. So I think, yes, France wants to take over the initiative, which is what Mr. Macron often tries. Let's think about the European army, for example, but it does not often materialize. So I think there is a motivation in France to take over the initiative, maybe even to pressure Germany, but I'm not sure that it's working.
So Germany is reluctant so far?
Reluctant to any French efforts to change our approach towards Ukraine, towards Russia, and towards Europe.
Okay, and a question about the Trump-Zelensky call that has been discussed and is being discussed still in the United States. There was a part in which they were discussing Europe and were discussing apparently not enough European support to Ukraine. Trump raised this issue and Zelensky agreed with him. And they also mentioned Angela Merkel saying that she's not doing enough, that she's only talking and not doing enough. How was this received in Germany, and do you think it might have some negative impact on Ukrainian-German relations?
Well, I think as so often with Mr. Trump, it was not really clear what they were talking about. Because I think what Mr. Trump was talking about when he said support was money. Because the US is still the biggest donor in Ukraine, but just after this, there comes the European Union and Germany. So we are giving a lot of money. And if I'm not mistaken, together, European Union and Germany, so European Union means also German money, 20% in it, then we are even giving more than the United States. So I think this is what he was talking about, because he wants to save money. Wherever he is, wherever on earth, he wants to save money. What Mr. Zelensky was agreeing to I think, was the military support. That he says we don't get enough support from Germany and from the European Union and from France and so on, because they're not helping us with building up our army, with sending lethal...
He mentioned sanctions.
He also mentioned sanctions, but I think a little bit later. He first said, yes, I absolutely agree, they're not supporting us enough, it's 1000% sure, and then he was talking about sanctions. Yes, the United States have tougher sanctions on Russia than the European Union, but I don't think because of Ukraine. I think because of the meddling in the 2016 elections. And Mr. Trump was always trying to stop these sanctions. He was always trying to not harden them and to not make them more tough on Russia. And he even tweeted about it. I was forced to sign this because they are not getting along with each other. He wants to get along with everyone, especially with autocrats, it seems. So I think he's the last one to say we are much tougher. Yes, the US is much tougher, but not because of him. Because of him, there would be almost a total rehabilitation of Mr. Putin. And one more thing, talking about sanctions. The US president has the authority to sanction companies involved in Nord Stream 2 since August 2017. He's not using this authority because he says there must be other ways, or there must be no way, or as long as we can sell our LNG to Germany, it's fine when Russia also builds a pipeline. So yes, there are tougher US sanctions on Russia than German or European sanctions, because we are as one entity, we have our sanctions there, no single country. But the US, but especially Mr. Trump is I think not in a position to say they are not doing enough on sanctions because he doesn't want these sanctions.
So do you think this conversation might have some sort of impact on Ukraine-German relations?
Yes. I mean, no question. In Germany, it was taken very negatively, this whole conversation. Not as a journalist, I asked the Chancellery and I asked the German Foreign Office. The Chancellery said, quote, "We don't comment on this." And they said, you can tell this everyone, we don't comment on this. The Foreign Ministry said, it's not true. We are doing so much when it comes to maintaining sanctions, when it comes to giving money, and also when it comes to other aspects than military aspects, like all these German projects of the German Development Agency and so on, which are going on in Ukraine, even in the war areas where IDP homes are funded by Germany and so on and so on. So there's a lot of German help. So it was not taken positively for sure. One more thing which was taken negatively was Mr. Zelensky's claim that he had 100% control over the next general prosecutor. I think this was taken very negatively because not necessarily in our government, but in our pro-Russian opposition, which is growing and growing and growing from the left and right. They said, you see, it's a corrupt country. As soon as he is openly speaking about things, he says, our judicial system is not independent and we will rule it. And if this is true, then everything else can also be true. What Mr. Trump claims about Mr. Biden, about Mr. Lutsenko, about Mr. Shokin and everyone. So this sentence, which I think he retracted later or yesterday in this interview marathon, he said, of course, he's independent. Of course, we have an independent system. But I think this was really damaging. And I also asked the Ukrainian presidency if he agreed to publishing this transcript before it was published, and they are not willing to answer this question. But I believe they would not agree to publishing such transcript, and I think they know how harming it is for the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian credibility.
Do you think this situation, does it erode the support for Ukraine in Germany?
No, I don't think that this transcript will lead to less German money for Ukraine. I don't think that this transcript and the telephone conversation, and we don't know if they really said this, will lead to Germany softening its stance on Russia sanctions, because Germany is a very, let's say, traditional country with a very conservative government, and I mean conservative not in a way that right-wing, but in a way that a lot has to happen to change the German way. that's a good thing about Mrs. Merkel. You know, she is very consistent on what she's doing, and she's doing this for years, and she is not giving up to loud screaming, let's put it this way, and to populism, which tells her from all sides what she has to do. So I think, although it's damaging for German-Ukrainian relations, it will not decrease the German support.
You mentioned Angela Merkel, but we know that there will be soon change. There will be soon Germany without Merkel. How will this new Germany look like, and what might change in the relations with Ukraine or Russia? Or is it too early to tell?
Of course, the German-Ukrainian and German-Russian relation depend on the outcome of the next elections. As it looks now, and we are still 2 years away from the next German federal elections, we will again have a CDU-led government, because they are right now still polling strongest, with I think 27, 28%. And after them, we have the Green Party with like 24%, and then other parties. Left and right-wing extremists each at, I think left-wing extremists at 8% and right-wing at 13%. But there's no chance that they will make it. Let's not say no chance, but under the current circumstances, we don't know what happens. If there is another refugee crisis, if Russia finds some dirty videos of Mrs. Merkel or whatever, something like this, then of course this could change suddenly. But if it goes along as it looks right now, we will have another CDU government or CDU in the government, and the position will not change dramatically. However, depending on the new Chancellor, who will most probably come from the CDU, we could have a different nuances in this approach towards Ukraine and Russia. There are some which I think are very consistent and which are in the so-called Merkel camp, as we call it, and there are some others which are more right-wing and which would like to take over, which have a more critical view on refugee politics, and also a more critical view, I think, on sanctions. There are also some right-wing candidates which want the refugees out, but also have a tough stance on Russia. So it's really hard to say so far.